Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hey, Stu. Hey, Megan. How are you? Hi, Joan.
Morning.
We
Hey,
have
Jim.
quite a few people joining, so it would be wonderful if, whilst you're waiting, just use the chat to say where you're calling from and what interested you in this call. Just introduce yourself and a bit of insights or what questions you might be arriving with. Um, Hi, Tam. How are you? Hey, Stan. Lovely to see you. Awake early in Pacific time zone.
Tamsin, I will wake up at 5:30 every day for you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good to know. We don't normally, I think we've got some of the eastern part of the world on this call, so we were trying to be a bit more. Um, so, hi, Jeffrey. How are you? Nice to see you. So, I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to facilitate the session, and Beth, who you all know, and Kelsey, who will be helping with the breakout groups. Um, just to say, please use the chat as we always like you to do for comments and questions. And something I do just want to say, based on some feedback we got, was this is a safe space to talk or just to listen. And there's no pressure on anybody to have to talk. But it is wonderful if you feel free and comfortable to do that, and to also have your cameras on, which is also wonderful. But please don't take anything as a requirement that you have to talk. Um, so welcome everybody. I'll hand over to Tom, and I will be leaving early. So if you do see my screen go off, please understand that it's just I've had to duck out. Let me hand over to Tom.
Okay, well, thanks, Tamsin, and thanks everyone. And we're really happy to have Beth with us today. And we're gonna do away with a lot of the formalities. The idea is just to jump in and have a meaningful conversation and to try to generate as much interest and as much participation as possible. There are actually kind of no ground rules per se, other than let's uh, let's be respectful, and let's listen attentively, and let's also put into the chat any questions or concerns that you might have, or questions that you want Beth to answer, or what the rest of us. And we will evolve pretty quickly into group work and then discussions. And then the idea kind of towards the end, we're going to be doing some work with one of the frameworks, the flower framework that Beth has come up with, and we'll do some work on that. And then we'll save some time toward the last 5 or 10 minutes to have everyone kind of pitch in and kind of do the reflections of the day and where they think we should go from here. So the idea again is to have a good conversation, open, and with that, I want to jump right into it so we can get to Beth. And Beth, I picked up your book several months ago. It was really enlightening. And I really look forward to listening to your thoughts about this. And so, can you tell us a little bit about multisolving and what are some examples of it?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Um, and hi, everyone. Thanks for coming and for your attention. I always say the biggest gift we give each other is our attention, but right now, when our attention is being pulled in so many directions, I feel that even more so. So, thanks for being here, and I hope we can bolster each other for whatever is ahead today and this week and beyond. Um, Multisolving, the way we talk about it at Multisolving Institute, has kind of a three-part definition. And the first part is the most simple, most obvious, and that is taking actions that address multiple needs at the same time. And that's the part of multi-solving that tends to attract people, right? It's this promise of, for one investment or one policy, you can meet many goals at the same time. Um, for us, when we're really looking at multi-solving for its true staying power and impact, we note two other attributes. One is that those multiple benefits are pursued in a way that also centers or prioritizes equity, that addresses historical inequities and builds systems that work for everyone. So many, many goals, one action in a way that pays attention to equity. And then the third part is that we say that operates from what we call a web of relationship worldview. And we'll probably talk more about this this morning, but I in the book talk a lot about a web of relationship worldview, which is really interacting as though we live in on a planet and in societies that are interconnected and interdependent. Multisolving works because of that interconnection and interdependence, but multisolving is also for many people a chance to experience aligning our actions with that fundamental understanding of how the world works. So that's the definition. Usually it translates better with examples. So I'm glad you asked about that, Tom. And I was thinking about that this morning. I'll offer two, both because they're born of crisis. Actually, one thing we find is multi-solving arises in response to crisis often. And seems like today that's a good place to start. So one is a project that we studied that happened in Japan after the Fukushima nuclear disaster. An energy, you probably all remember, there was an energy crisis as the nuclear reactors of the country were turned off. There wasn't enough energy for a time. And a project called Green Curtains happened across Japan. What it was planting vegetative structures, literally green curtains made of vines on the south sides of buildings, factories, industrial buildings. But these green curtains also were planted with edible vines. So they produced food that in many cases was either employees could take home with them at the end of their workday or were served in the company cafeteria. So that sense of one action, multiple benefits, the shade that vegetation produced meant less need for cooling the physical plant, so less energy. But because the bulk of the energy system then was carbon intensive, it also meant less greenhouse gas emissions. They were beautiful. If you go to our website, multisolving.org, you can see some pictures of them. And they provided nutritious food to people. So multiple benefits. One other example I talk about a lot was in New Zealand, and it was in response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis, which did many things but put the construction trade into a slump. The New Zealand government wanted to get construction back working, and so they took on retrofitting homes for energy efficiency. So similar reduced energy use, reduced greenhouse gases as a result, but also saving money for the residents of those buildings. This project prioritized people on fixed incomes. So there you see that equity thread I was mentioning fitting in. And the fascinating thing about that experiment was they also did a health assessment of the people living in those buildings and found reduced hospitalizations and reduced medication costs just by virtue of living in buildings that were less cold and drafty. And in fact, the health system savings were the biggest financial return of that whole project, even though it started in response to an economic crisis. So another flavor of multi-solving, sometimes we talk about how can the solution to one crisis be the solution to many. So two examples, and they're both documented on our website if those catch your eye.
Okay, great. What moved you to actually write a book? What was it that you felt that you would accomplish by writing a big book, and what do you hope comes out of this? What kind of what will it generate?
Yeah. I I bet anyone who writes a book has to have a lot of reasons. One probably doesn't get you across the finish line. But for me, there was a really personal reason, which was a kind of a quest to understand a different way of working than what I'd been trained to do, which was to break problems into smaller and smaller parts. I have a PhD in neurogenetics. I focused on one molecule and one cell for years. So I'm a master of the breaking things into little parts. But I started to see that there is, for some problems, actually a power in bundling problems and making them bigger. So there was my personal both frustration that from UN climate talks where I spent a lot of time, the breaking it into smaller pieces didn't seem to be getting us where we needed to go. Like what was the opposite of that? So that was the motivation for me. As I met more and more people working in this way, most of them I came to feel had figured it out for themselves and didn't even, I call multi-solving a hidden movement. Like people who do it often are so grateful just for the word. Like they may have been working in this way their whole careers, but they didn't know there was a word. They didn't know there was a community of practice. And we're still trying to weave that together and connect people. So I think of it as kind of, holding up a mirror to this hidden movement and celebrating people working in this way and helping them find each other. Um, the third reason, and I'll stop with three, I think was an anticipation of the kind of crises, the polycrisis we find ourselves within. Studying multi-solving showed me the adaptive capacity of people working together across sectors. So to multi-solve, you need to put together people with different skills from different parts of a system with trusting relationships. And I started to see again and again how even after the bike lanes are built, the urban orchards are constructed, the homes are insulated, there's this rewired system of new connections. And I've seen again and again how those rewired systems are a source of such creativity, ability to meet crises, to move into opportunities. And as we began to sense, when I was writing the book, it was at the beginning of COVID, climate impacts, like as we get into rougher and rougher water, I believe those networks are an incredible source of change and sustenance. So I wrote the book hoping to help strengthen those types of networks around the world. One thing that we offer at Multisolving Institute are some guides for reading the book together in a book group. And the wish I have for that, picture an organization or a community reading about multi-solving together and rewiring their own little village system, organizational system for more multi-solving and more connection.
And you draw upon Meadows and systems thinking. Why don't you? I know that you had a long relationship with Meadows. Do you care to comment about that and how it all started and how it evolved over time?
Yeah, so Tom's mentioning Donella Meadows. Many of you probably know her work, the Limits to Growth Club of Rome study in 1972, her famous book Thinking in Systems. And Dana was a friend and teacher and boss for me at the beginning of my career. So my orientation, really the foundation is that stream of thinking, of tackling what now we call the polycrisis through a systems lens. And I didn't think a book on multi-solving could work without a grounding in systems theory. Not every publisher agreed, actually. I'm super grateful to Island Press because some were like, couldn't you just cut that first third and just tell people about multi-solving? And I don't think so, because multi-solving works by virtue of complex systems. You get to multi-solving when you stop fighting interconnection and decide to work with it. And systems thinking is the language for talking about and understanding interconnection. So it's roughly, I guess, the first third of the book. There's a chapter on each element of systems, stocks, flows, feedback loops, and then putting all of that together into the complexity, the uncertainty, the unpredictability that comes with complex systems, but also the potential for novelty, the potential for transformation, the potential for change happening way faster than we might ever expect. So I hope people read the book and feel like there's more possibilities once you start to think about systems, as opposed to being overwhelmed by everything is interconnected and how do we start, which is sometimes where systems thinking kind of starts and stops with, oh, it's just too much. Let's go back to dividing things into smaller and smaller chunks.
And then you kind of tie things up with a big note on equity. Care to comment a little bit more about that? Why
Yeah,
core to your thinking?
Yeah, and of course that's fascinating at this moment in the United States when that's a word that's almost being erased from or trying to be erased. I don't think it can be from conversations. Well, so much in the book is me trying to synthesize what I and my colleagues have learned from multi-solvers. So we never claim to have invented anything. A lot of the way that we work is to look for bright spots of multi-solving. We find it everywhere we look, and we also find it to be the exception, not the rule. And that's something we could talk about in a bit. And so when you study something and you see it everywhere at all scales, at all sectors. You see it in urban design, but you also see it in ecosystem restoration, and you also see it in, resilience hubs. Like on the surface, everything is different. What sticks with you is what's the same across all that diversity. And one of the things we already mentioned is this way of working with trusting relationships and rewiring systems. Um, and hand in hand with that is equity, because you can't have authentic, trusting relationships across any boundary or border if people aren't there for each other's well-being. And you can't be there for each other's well-being without grappling with equity. So multi-solving actually isn't possible, I don't think, without a focus on equity. And the flip side is also true that simply focusing on equity is often a multi-solving solution in that more equitable systems function better and produce multiple benefits. Um, uh, Equitable systems have better collective intelligence because everybody is being listened to. They have a faster response time because usually the shocks and impacts hit the most marginalized people first. And if they are not part of decision making, then your system is actually slowed down, right? The response time, inequity is a terrible contributor to the response time of systems. And then there's work of people like Heather McGhee, her book, The Sum of Us, documented in the US, the cost to everyone of inequitable systems. My friend Nathaniel Smith, who's founder of Partnership for Southern Equity, um, uh, is prominent in the book. A lot of what I learned from Nathaniel is described there. He's on the board of Multisolving Institute. And Partnership for Southern Equity, it's in the name, they focus on equity across all elements of society. But Nathaniel says, if you're in Atlanta and you're stuck in traffic, that's actually an equity issue. Like the transportation system of Atlanta is shaped by redlining, is shaped by inequities, but there's not, Nathaniel says, there's not black traffic and white traffic, right? Everyone is stuck in traffic. And so we can make our systems work better by making them more equitable, and we can multi-solve and build the trusting relationships we need by being brave and courageous and aligning with our values to put equity at the center of everything that we do. So very few topics in my book got a whole chapter, but equity is one. It sort of says how important I think it is to everything else.
Okay. Why don't we break into small groups now, and we're going to do a little bit of work because Beth wants us to kind of dive in and use some ideas here. And so let's just get some groundwork framing for what is it that makes good breakout rooms? What is it that makes good breakout rooms in a session, and what is it that doesn't kind of work very well? So I'll ask people to kind of raise their hand and let's do a quick brainstorm on what it takes to make good breakout rooms and what it takes to screw up good breakout rooms. So anybody? Feel free to raise your hand or come off a mute and speak up. Finn, please.
So I would say just acknowledge how much time there is overall, and if you are the first person to speak, do not speak by more than that amount of time divided by the number of people there.
Well done. Spoken from experience, right? Okay, anyone else? Some simple kind of guidelines, norms as we go into breakout room.
I see in the chat, not monopolizing the floor. So that's a little similar to what Finn said.
Uh-huh.
Jeffrey, you're on mute.
Sarah came up with time for reflection,
Краснял,
contributing to
как бы
the,
пишет, что интернет плохо работает.
sorry?
No, I think it was somebody not on mute in a.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Anyone else? Because Beth, you have some of your favorites. I always kind of like the ones that you put in about lean of speech, listening with curiosity. Recognize that English is not everybody's favorite language. I'm borrowing freely from your guidelines and what you put in.
Yeah, I think those are good ones. Curiosity goes so far in multi-solving, and I think everyone's here with curiosity. So I expect the breakout groups are going to be fantastic. I see one more hand up too.
Yeah, Pam?
I would say speak from your own experience in the present moment, letting go of trying to convince anyone of anything and just be in the moment, exploring together.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Pam. Okay, so Beth talks a little bit about hidden movement and hidden moments. So let's see what we can uncover in these breakout sessions, and we'll take about 15 minutes. And while you're in your group, introduce yourselves, and then how does multisolving play a role for you and your work, and kind of insights that you might have or what might be possible.
Yeah, and I'd say my advocacy is just follow the conversation where it goes. If there was more multi-solving in your work, what could that enable? And we'll have time for just a few highlights as people come back from the groups.
Okay.
Okay, you should have a note to join a breakout room now. So we just click that
Okay,
button.
thanks, Kelsey. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Again, either raise your hand or come off mute. And what surprised you? What are the things that you heard that perhaps gave you insights that you didn't expect, or surprises from your small group work? And let's just jump right into that.
Tom, I'm gonna give it a shot. Oh, Tamsin, did you want to go?
No. Carry on.
Thank you, Beth. So I have been in a group together with Alba and Keith, and we've had really lovely conversations. But we're coming back actually with a question, because what we wondered is, like all of us work in, like within the systemic approach, and we were trying to. All of us are also new to multi-solving, as it is framed by the approach that you're bringing. And we were trying to understand the concept by checking where are the limits of the concept. So we were wondering, we were thinking the systemic approach, right? If done well, it always will include equity. The world we live in, you need to elevate equity every time anyway, right? That's the reality of where we are. But we were wondering, what is the difference? What might be the difference between like relational systems change and multi-solving? And so this is just a question I would like to bring to the fire from our small breakout.
Yeah. Can you say a few more words for you? What does relational systems change? How do you think of that?
So you spoke to the third aspect, to the web of a relationship worldview, right? So this is something that, like, it's a new concept. I don't know what you mean by that. Like, I haven't unpacked it with you yet. But a lot of the work that we're doing, we're calling it relational systems change. That means that it is a relationship between humans, like as we come together in our aspirations, in our needs, in our wants, in our ups and downs, in our, like difficulties to communicate with each other, in how we fail, in how we disappear rather than show up, and how to, like how to be in that together, how to be in that close, and just leaning into the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say this feels more like just people discovering different words for similar ways of working rather than being distinctive. One thing we did, and actually one of the researchers who helped with that, Susie Moser, is on the call today. We wanted to interview people who are multi-solving. And Susie, as a social scientist, said, well, how do we know multi-solvers when we see them? And pushed us to define 4 things. So one we've talked about is this centering of equity. A second one we ended up calling solidarity, which means that your issue is as important to me as my own issue. So the children's asthma advocates will show up for the climate advocates, but vice versa, like that your child has asthma matters to me as a climate activist. We talked about multi-directional flows. So that might mean sharing money, sharing relationships, but also sharing knowledge so that it's not just the experts with credentials who are seen as teachers, but people with lived experience, a grandmother in a community. And then the last one is crossing silos. So by that we mean different disciplines, but also maybe local versus national leaders coming together. So those 4 characteristics are something we look for. And my guess is probably those are all really important in relational systems change too. And then the last quick thing I'll say, in the book, I talk about the metaphor of a dandelion for multi-solving. And we say beneath the soil is where a lot of that relational work happens. It's invisible to people, and it's some of the most important, but also most difficult. So that's probably where a lot of our approaches would meet. Great question.
Okay, thanks. Let's hear from some of the other groups and what the questions you came up with, or surprises or insights. Anybody? Yeah,
If it's okay,
Lourdes,
can I jump in? Thank you.
please.
So I was with Pam, and I think we had an excellent conversation. We were talking a little bit about what would be our kind of pie in the sky. Sorry if there's any background noise. I'm sharing the office, but we were talking about maybe what our pie in the sky would be if multi-solving could get in terms of what we would see a year from now, no, or sometime from now. And we got at the Pam was sharing this really interesting insight about the need for a lot of these very dinosaur structures to kind of collapse. No, these ways of being that don't serve us anymore and that are kind of stymieing the transformation that is necessary. So one thing that we're discussing is this element of deconstruction that has to also happen alongside the changes and the transformations that we're trying to get at. And then just two other smaller points. We were talking about the centrality of Indigenous practice and Indigenous wisdom. We were talking about Tyson Yunkaporta's Stand Talk. We were talking about the importance of place-based awareness, of course, and then the centrality of centering equity, as you were mentioning, will require us touching on topics that are often really delicate to touch upon. So one thing that I was questioning and wondering about is how to deal with power in a realistic way, especially when equity requires kind of learning spaces where people are going to be willing to participate, and people are not always willing to participate in these spaces, and those people who need to be around the table, or perhaps they don't need to be around the table. But what do we do in the face of power dynamics, as we know in the US, right? These actors who are going to act against multi-solving, or things like the risk of our national parks being exposed to even further mining and further destruction of the resources and natural habitats, or the reversal of women's rights that we're seeing in things like this. So I'll stop there. So thank you.
Good points. Thanks, Lourdes. Dan, you're up. What do you have?
Thank you. I was in a great group with Jerry, Hillary, and Megan, and I wanted to share one quick thing and then ask a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm in Ontario, Canada, and I've been working since 2012 on a project where we changed the policy for youth to ride high school students to ride transit for free, and then at grade 9, I intervene and train all grade 9s. We took it from 28,000 rides to almost 600,000 rides a year. And that to me it's environment and health and all the things they get to do in the community. And we've seen so many benefits. My question or thought is this: what I've observed in my work is the importance of understanding language. But I don't just mean language. I mean how we use words, how we identify with other groups, how we can talk about different values. Sometimes my passion is the environment, but I have to frame it around health or youth or school or attendance. And I guess the question is, or any thought, if you could speak around that, is just your opinion or observations around the importance of how we use language in this process. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have a quick response to that, which is we didn't always use the term multi-solving. It is one my colleagues and I came up with, and we were like, gosh, does the world need a new word? There's so much jargon. Before multi-solving, the term was usually co-benefits. And the thing about co-benefits is it usually implies, but is not always explicit, there's a main benefit. And often in my world, that was climate change. And then there were nice co-benefits, like your kindergartner will have fewer ER visits for her asthma. And in impacted communities, that's often flipped. Like if my kid has asthma, that's probably the main benefit for me. And climate future 50 years from now, that's a nice co-benefit. So one thing about the word multi-solving is that it acknowledges what I think is true, that there isn't a hierarchy of benefits, that we need them all and we can have them all. So it sounds like you're discovering a similar thing along the way. The second thing about multi-solving versus co-benefits is multi-solving is a verb, right? It's a thing you do as opposed to an outcome, a benefit. And I think that's more realistic. Like it is what we do and the benefits eventually come, but also more motivating, right? It's an active process, not something we're sort of hoping might happen. Thanks.
Thanks for that question, Dan. Anyone else want to speak up in terms of what they heard in their own group discussions before we move on? I don't see any hands raised or anyone coming off mute. And I don't want to cut anyone off either, so. Okay, thanks, fair enough. Then let's kind of pick up on some of the other questions that and points that you make in your writings. And when you talk with this, you talk a lot about coherence, and you say it's kind of more important to be coherent. It matters more to be coherent than how big our actions are. You want to work a little bit on that, Beth?
Yeah, so coherence is in the field of complexity science, coherence is a kind of specific word. And what it means is there's a high degree of self-similarity across different parts of a system. And those of you who are curious about fractals, you might recognize the word coherent, because a fractal is a very coherent system. If you think of the silhouette of a tree without leaves, how every angle between the branches, whether they're the tiny branches at the tip or the big branches near the base, is the same angle. But two different species of trees they're self-similar internally, they're coherent, but they aren't coherent with each other. We talked about the web of relationship worldview. In the book, I try to make the case that there's actually two worldviews that are and have been battling for centuries now on our planet. One is the web of relationships worldview, which of course is stewarded by many indigenous cultures, various wisdom traditions. The other I call the collection of objects worldview. And those words are from Thomas Berry, the eco-theologian. And in the collection of objects worldview, instead of relationships, what matters is domination, separation, and supremacy. And in every action that we take, from our smallest interactions, say in our family systems or our communities or organizations, to national policy, there's dozens of choices a day of which worldview we're coherent with. Okay, if so a high degree of coherence would be embodying that web of relationship worldview across all different parts, say, of your organization. So a climate organization is focused on a web of relationship when it comes to humans and the earth. And some have really integral policies about how people in that organization relate to one another. So then when it comes to race or gender, they're also coherent with a web of relationship. But we all know, scandals emerge now and then of really powerful climate organizations, but there's some sort of abuse of power or sexual abuse, say from the top of the organization to young women in the organization. I'm not going to name names, but there have been examples of that in the last few years. So that's incoherent, right? When it comes to nature, it's a web of relationships. When it comes to people, it's domination and supremacy. The thing about coherence is that if you practice, okay, so I'll back up. It's really easy to feel powerless right now, right? If we're not, leading the National Institute of Health, how are we supposed to push back to what's happening in the United States? Or we're not making, UN level decisions. We're just tiny little bits of this massive system. The thing about coherence is that no matter where you are, you can align your actions. You have more power to align your actions with the worldview that you think is the one consistent with ongoing life on Earth. You can do that in how you raise your children and how you relate to your partner and how you manage your employees. And the thing about coherence is that it's a way to practice and build a muscle memory that can then be called upon in moments of crisis or opportunity. So a lot of what I think about in my book is we're entering such an uncertain period. We're finding our old strategies of 5-year plans not working anymore. If they ever did, we could talk about if they ever did. Coherence, if you know what you're coherent to, you can find yourself in totally unprecedented situations and you still know your values, you still know the world you want to see, you still know that this relational way of interacting is your best bet. You'll know what to do if you rely on coherence. And it doesn't matter, as Tom said, if you're thinking about coherence, because of the ability of systems to amplify coherent patterns, it doesn't matter nearly as much how powerful or well-placed you are as it does how high is your fidelity to one worldview or the other. There's chapters on this in the book. It's hard to boil it down in 5 minutes, but maybe that's enough to spark questions at least, Tom.
Okay, thanks. I do want to pick up on Finn's point in the chat box about Finn, you want to, rather than me repeating what you put up there, can you put that out, put your point up and let's address that, because I think it's an important point about systems thinking and oppressive systems.
I think it's coming from a place of hesitancy. When I started to hear systems thinking, we steer away from it a little bit in our work, and just because it can not acknowledge power, history, and justice within it. Within when you start to map out the complexity, it doesn't center them, it doesn't show, and that it can make oppressive systems seem neutral rather than designed. And we tend to come from a critical realist view, but this seems to bounce back nicely between the two and take value from both, and my understanding of it now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Finn. I mean, one question I sometimes get is why another book that's heavy on systems thinking? Because there are so many great ones. But one thing I feel is that many of the best systems thinking books, at least by Americans, were written before the whole culture has done as much grappling as it has in the last couple decades with power and justice. And I do agree with you that a lot of systems thinking kind of leaves that out. And so I don't think I have every answer, but I did do my best to kind of integrate what I've learned about power and equity with systems thinking. So if you ever get your hands on the book, I'd be curious how you think I did at it.
And many systems tool and frameworks includes the mental models and the values that give rise to those systems and structures and policies. So
yeah, I mean, I guess the last thing I'd say on that is most of systems thinking really tells people to look for what they call leverage points, right? There are these sort of magical small points where if only we could move that lever, we would see transformation. And I spent lots of decades finding leverage points, coaching people to find their own. And almost always people would come back and say, yeah, I don't have the power to push that lever. Like if they did, it already would have been changed almost. So the thing about coherence is that it focuses people on where they do currently have power, as opposed to identifying hypothetical places where they do not yet have power. And by building multi-solving networks, you're also building power at the same time, right? You're bringing people together across who may not have been connected before. That, you know, community organizers would call that power building.
yeah. And thanks for bringing that up too. Kim, you also had a question about, is there a slippery slope of incorporating lived experience into multi-solving? You care to comment or to develop that
Yeah,
further?
I don't know if Kim is still here. I'd just be curious what the worry is. Yeah.
Hi, I just, yes. I love the idea of using our lived experience and bringing in local traditional knowledge, but I also think that the right can use that to say, to value the influencers over the experts, to maybe say, well, the science might say this, but people's lived experience says something else.
Uh-huh. Yeah, thanks for explaining that a little more. Yeah, I think the thing I would say about that is multi-solving, we talk about something, we call it the multi-solving way, and it's the attitudes and approaches that we see across the diversity of multi-solving. And one element of the multi-solving way is an orientation toward learning, which is really to position oneself very humbly as a learner, as everything is a hypothesis, and it's meant to be tested against the world. And are you getting, if your results are cleaner water, is the water getting cleaner? And so a learning attitude is always your protection against either the arrogance of the experts or, potentially the flaws of lived experience that could have bias built into it. If either of those is held up against, yeah, we're measuring the water, we're measuring health. Hopefully that helps steer through uncertainty better. And all of it is hard if people are, disingenuous and, that's probably a different problem. But yeah, good point, and thank you.
Sarah Handel Blackford had to get off because she had to pick up her kids at school, but she did make an interesting comment about how multi-solving can provide us with a sense of agency and a source of positive energy that can support us and steer us towards action that we're all kind of facing now collectively. And she apologized that she had to leave, but I think we all have this. And some of the comments before we went into breakout rooms, that the political situation in which many countries are now creates a sense of urgency. So how can we, again?
Well, the political situation, and just the realities of escalating climate impacts and biodiversity loss, et cetera, creates a sense of urgency. There also are very deliberate actors who are trying to create a sense of paralysis, right? Like, I think it is the intersection of those two that is so especially painful. And the other another gift of multi-solving is that call to start where you are. A few questions that we say are great multi-solving questions are, how is the solution to what keeps me awake at night the solution to what keeps you awake at night, right? That call to creativity of where our biggest needs intersect with someone else's biggest needs. And multi-solving has this fractal ability to happen at every scale. And so in this moment when everything seems overwhelming, and I don't want this to sound like overly simplistic, but part of multi-solving is the call to act where you are, and that it is far better to do a small thing where you are than nothing because everything seems too small. And so multi-solving helps you see what's right in front of you, but coherence is what holds out the possibility that that smallness is actually enough to matter. And here's just one example of that. In the United States, in the 90s, there was a couple people in Massachusetts. Some were MIT professors, some were community enthusiasts about renewable energy. And they wrote a simple little policy for how they thought renewable energy could be sold to the grid, to customers via the grid. There was a moment of crisis in the Massachusetts state government where suddenly, very quickly, they needed a policy about that exact question. They were like, where's there a policy? And these like handful of people had been trying to write one. So they grabbed it, and that was what they used in Massachusetts. And it kind of worked, and they polished it a little bit. And that's become the model, is my understanding, across the entire United States. Something like 300 million grid connections now follow that little tiny thing. So you could have said, oh, Barnstable, Massachusetts, a little town on Cape Cod near the Atlantic Ocean. Like, what are they doing? They're just messing around. Now, there were thousands of other little groups of renewable energy enthusiasts whose policies did not become the national one, but the uncertainty of complex systems says you don't know which one it's going to be, so you have to do them all. And don't let yourself get hung up because it seems too small.
Okay. Thanks. And also, you picked up nicely on Dan's earlier point. How do you frame concepts and how do you frame what we're in as that speaks across different groups? Let's turn toward the flower. All right. We're at that time where you do have the tool of the flower, and I think you're going to share with us, right? And then we can see where we go from there.
Yep. I think I'll just say a few words about it, and then I'll share my screen. So I told you that one way we work at Multisolving Institute is by looking for bright spots, for places where multisolving is successful. And those places are the exception, not the rule. So we've been pretty optimistic in this whole call, right? Multisolving is great, and there's so many exciting possibilities, and that's wholehearted. I really believe that. And I want to acknowledge how hard it is. And I know many of you know that from just your own work. So let's just name a couple of the barriers to multi-solving. I forget who said after the breakout groups how hard it is to lead and hold conversations about equity and justice. Many of us don't feel equipped for that. So that's an obstacle. We have decision-making systems that are not structured for multi-solving whatsoever, right? Decisions happen in silos within governments. An example I give of that is if you think about decarbonization at the national level, most of that needs to happen in energy ministries and transportation ministries. But actually, the largest benefits are going to be found in health ministries. But very few, I mean, tell me if you know of a government on Earth that's organized for those agencies to work together on, say, transportation planning in a like really deep way. Every year, the World Health Organization says the costs of decarbonization would be more than offset by the health benefits. And yet, here we are leaving most of that synergy on the table. So there's those problems. There's budgetary silos. Another one that comes up all the time is for, say, for companies, clean energy investment counts as as a capital expense, but the money savings is on the operational budget, and those are managed by two different groups of people and two different spreadsheets. Okay, here's another one. For many cities that are facing flooding from increased precipitation, the cheapest solutions might be to protect wetlands upstream of a city, but those are in whole different jurisdictions. The city doesn't have any way, without a lot of creativity, to invest their budget for flood prevention in upstream wetland conservation, right? So that there's jurisdictional barriers. So when we talk to multi-solvers and we hear all of these things that get in the way of weaving these relationships we're talking about, one thing we hear again and again is a need for a tool to visualize whole systems and how the different parts could all be elevated together. So it was the quest for that tool that led to the, or a tool like that led to what I want to show you today. So it's called Flower, and I'm going to share my screen and give you a look at it, and then let's play with it a little bit. Okay, so this is Flower. Kelsey can put the link. It's freely available on our website, and you can dig in deeper than we can do here today. So Flower stands for the framework, or lately we sometimes say facilitating long-term whole system equity-based reflection. So it's an acronym, and it looks like a flower. You'll see as we start to move the controls, the petals of a flower appear. So reading a flower diagram is pretty simple. The bigger the petal, the more benefit you think a particular investment or policy has. So what I just did kind of randomly is a benefit with lots of jobs and some improvement to the built environment. In the standard flower, we predetermine kind of the most popular types of benefits that we find. So there's jobs, resilience, built environment, that's things like housing and mobility, food and water, climate protection, biodiversity, health and well-being. And at the center is connection, which sometimes people would call social cohesion. We also think about connection between humans and the more than human, so with nature and ecosystems. So at a glance, you can look at any flower diagram of a bike lane versus an orchard versus a solar panel, and see what the people who built that flower together thought the most important benefits would be. The other thing, because equity is so important, as we've been saying, is that each flower diagram asks you to think about each benefit and whether it improves equity. So this would be, do you see as I move the slider how the jobs petal is getting darker? It starts kind of medium. If jobs actually went only to the very well off, that petal would get paler and paler until it was sort of transparent. If the jobs instead went, let's say, to low income workers, so it's addressing economic inequity, then the petal would get darker and darker. So that is a really quick overview of sort of how to read a flower diagram. And what I thought could be fun to try is to create one together and try to build on it. And that will at least give you enough sense that you could go to our website and try flower on your own. And to give us a place to start, this is just a exercise that we sometimes do when we're teaching people about flower. We say, imagine you're in a US city that just acquired a vacant piece of land, and you need to decide as a member of a task force how to use that land. And you're going to try to satisfy a few different goals. There's the mayor's goals. So the mayor wants to reduce the city's carbon footprint, and she wants to meet other needs that community-based organizations have identified. So remember that, carbon footprint. A community association has a top priority to improve health and reduce chronic illness. And they also want to improve sense of community, and they'd love to see more well-paying jobs. And a conservation organization wants to protect native pollinators. Okay, so we've got climate protection, health And then a little less important, community and well-paying jobs and native pollinators. So we're not actually so we can remember those goals, we're not going to start with creating flowers. We're going to start here on assessing needs. And I'm going to do this part quickly. If we had, typically working with flowers, more of an hour or couple hour morning session, and we would actually have the controls in your hands, and we would build this needs assessment together. I'm going to just do it a little more quickly so you can get a sense of it. So I'm going to remind you the mayor's top goal, she really wants to improve climate protection. So what I'm doing here is dragging this slider, and the flower tool is keeping track of where we position things. So the further I go to the right, the more important that need is. Remember, there was the conservation group. They really wanted to improve native pollinators, so that would fall under biodiversity. The community group said health and reducing chronic illness was most important, and they had some sort of sub goals when it came to jobs and it came to a sense of community. So we'll in a true flower session, we would go back and forth and we'd say, no, this is actually a little more important, and someone would make the case why. But we'll sort of do that as good enough. So you're imagining for the next couple minutes, you're on a task force. You're trying to think of what to do with a piece of vacant land in a city that's going to, for sure, improve climate protection, biodiversity, and health, and also making a contribution to jobs and a sense of connection. So what I want you to do is use the chat and just shoot off some ideas about what might a city do on a piece of vacant land to make progress towards these kind of issues. And I'm going to ask Kelsey and Tom to kind of help look at the chat. It's hard for me to see it right now as people put ideas there. And let's just do 2 ideas. We'll make 2 flowers, and that will give you a good flavor.
Doug has said build a park.
Okay, so build a park.
With a fitness center, community
Park and
garden, food forest.
Okay. Okay.
Also has water component that's coming out within this park.
Okay, so we got a very cool park. And is there anything that's kind of different from a park?
Build a park with a fitness center.
Let's leave that with park.
Yeah.
All right. If park's the main idea, let's just do park.
Pickleball courts. Thanks, man.
All right.
Margie said plant native shrubs and perennials.
Okay, so we're kind of like playing out some of what the park might look like. Okay, so we're gonna go back to flower, and the flower will keep track of all these settings, and we're gonna go here to create flowers. And I'm just gonna, okay, so our first investment is a park. So that will help us keep track if we build a few flowers of which one is which. So let's feel free to go off mute and answer these questions as we go along. So this park sounds like it has a fitness center. It sounds like it has some native plants. What types of benefits should I start making petals for? Let's start with the fitness center. What benefits is that going to produce? Type it in the chat or just feel free to shout out.
Jobs for maintaining the facilities and running classes and
Okay, awesome. So there's probably jobs in landscaping and also teaching and community outreach. What else? Where would you put those native plants?
They could be grown all around the fitness center, and in fact, you could incorporate some food production as well.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to say native plants. That's probably going to help biodiversity in terms of the native pollinators that were desired. And if some of those plantings are also community gardens, we're going to see benefit for food and water. So I'm going to drag that slider. Can we get any other benefits out of this park?
Definitely connection.
Connection. Say a little bit about why you would think it would add to connection.
Well, having a heart, even just physically having a heart, where people need to come together to maintain it. There was something about community garden style in which people will have to come together, and when they're doing their sportive activities, they're coming together as well. If they're inviting schools around to educate the little ones, then that's connection as well.
Yeah, beautiful. And you start to see that all of this is also related to exactly how you design the park, right? Not every park will be open and inviting and create a sense of community, but it could with the proper design and the right community ownership. Maybe there's a community association that gets to make the decisions about the park. So I'm presenting this as though the point of this exercise is to get this diagram just right, and that's not actually accurate. The diagram is a means toward improving everyone's thinking and vision, what we want this park to look like, and most importantly, what do we need to do about how we invite people into it, how we design decision-making and governance, what's budgeted for, so that all those things can be anticipated. And the fact that there's a park creates as many benefits as possible, and benefits that match what the community wants as much as possible. So the last thing I'll show, and then probably Tom, we should wind down to maybe some Q&A. You might have been noticing this number here. We call this the needs match score. And this score is connecting what we did over here when we said, for our particular example, what do people need, with our idea of what investment. So as we add more features that fit what people need, the score goes up. So remember that health was really important. And so far we haven't added health, but I think we should, because this park has a fitness center. Maybe it has walking trails. It has beauty that's going to help with mental health. So watch what happens to the needs score as I make the health pedal larger. Do you see how that score is climbing? That means the flower we've created, our vision of this park, is a better fit to what the community told us they needed than when we started. So if we had more time, we would also talk about who benefits, where are the jobs going, who has access to the fitness center. That begins to open those essential conversations about equity. And the way we would prompt that discussion is for each petal asking people, how do we make sure the fitness center is accessible to senior citizens if they are a marginalized group? Oh, and people would talk about, that it's very safe, and that the exercises are appropriate not only for young, strong people, but for older people. So we'd say, yeah, we're making that health benefit more equitable, and we'd feel comfortable making the petal darker. And we would talk about the food benefit, who's getting access to those community garden plots, and so on. We periodically, and we're probably due for a new one, have webinars about flower, training webinars. And if you sign up for our newsletter, which someone can put in the chat, that's probably the best way. Feel free to play around on your own. There's a great user guide. But if you want to see some more of our insights about how to use flower, look out for one of those webinars.
Okay, great. There were some interesting side conversations there too about how people were building on the ideas. Milwaukee
Great.
Forest. And Kim was talking about it. She took her daughter to a garden, Three Sisters Garden. So anybody else want to speak up on that before Beth kind of gives her closing comments? And Kelsey, thanks for putting those in the margins there, in the chat, the newsletter, the sign up, and keeping us up to date. Yeah, Hillary.
This might be a little too facilitation 101, but I wonder if you've been in groups where you can feel in the room, they're like, flower, I don't know about this. How do you have recommendations for framing this so that folks who maybe aren't as starry-eyed about it as we are feel, okay, this is for me. I can be part of this conversation. Or is it
Yeah.
group
No,
facilitation?
that's a great question. I have a friend who says frameworks are like toothbrushes. Everybody needs one, but no one wants to use somebody else's. So yeah, I think that the important thing is probably, as with all facilitation, the point isn't the tool. The point is that people are trying to solve a problem together. For instance, one way that Kelsey recently used Flower was with community organizations in the Atlanta area in the US who had zeroed in on some community-based projects they wanted to do, and they could only afford to do one. So they were kind of at the point of having to prioritize. And Kelsey helped them use Flower, and they had like snacks and a meal, and it was fun and interactive, to create flowers of the different projects they were imagining and really just be there for their conversation about which one was what they wanted to do first. So that's the approach of trying to start where people are and figuring out how to use flower to meet what they need. A tricky thing about Flower has been for us actually to fund its development and further sharing because it is so simple and so generalizable. In this world of resilience planning and equity tools, you all know what they often look like, right? They are so detail specific and they look like you must have been really smart to make that. Like this is the opposite. We want this to be a low threshold to entry. And because multi-solving happens at so many scales all over the world, it has to be general. We're still looking for the funder who understands that in this chaos we're in, we need simple and generalizable, I believe, more than detailed specific. What I feel really proud about is that because it's like that, you can use it however you want. Like we have our way of using it, but if everyone starts with what the communities they're working with needs, you're going to invent your own ways. Great question.
Allison?
So Tom, oh, great.
Yeah.
Allison.
Thanks. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's super interesting, and I really am intrigued by the flower tool. In my own work, I'm always so interested in sort of making that connection between concepts and then like practically applying them to different challenges. And I guess my question is, and you were sort of answering it in your final comments there, but how does something like, I saw resilience there on the flower diagram, and obviously if you're increasing biodiversity and health and well-being, you are also benefiting resilience. And so is there some interactivity among the different petals? Because I would imagine as you increase some, it's going to have spillover benefits into the others. And maybe,
Yeah.
maybe that's important, maybe it's not, maybe it's just the process of using the tool and having those discussions that's really important. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's nothing mathematically built into the tool, right? Where when you move biodiversity, the resilience petal grows too. So that would come from the collective intelligence of the group, who would say, "Oh my goodness, we have increased the oyster beds at our coastal shoreline to protect biodiversity. Oh, that's also going to reduce storm surge in the next tropical storm." So flower, for better or worse, is only going to be as good as the collective intelligence you can foster as you use it. So that means having people in the room with the breadth of experience, right? So that you have the storm surge expert and the biodiversity expert, because flower is not going to do it for you. It's going to help the group see its own collective understanding. And just putting other wishes in the universe. We have this big wish that we also haven't been able to fund to create a library or maybe a garden of flowers, which would be flowers that would be keyed to the peer-reviewed literature on specific real projects, like an actual oyster bed in North Carolina or whatever. And so I'm not sharing my screen. There's a way to upload a flower you've already created. So there also could be a way to upload flowers others have created or flowers that are tied to a research article. So you could go back and forth. You could ask your group to create its flower, its vision, and you could say, look, here's an actual oyster bed. Let's see. And then people would be like, oh, we didn't even think about resilience. So you could iterate between ground truthed and collective wisdom. Also back to that question about lived experience isn't always complete. Well, this could be a way to kind of have a counterpoint to that. So putting wishes to the universe, we think flower could do a lot more good than so far we've been able to do.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And if there aren't any other closing comments, I think that was a nice wrap up there at the end. I just want to make an announcement for next week. We'll have our open dialogue, February 25th, on the task of resilience in the time of disaster with Susie Moser and Ava Rissy. And I also put the link there. If you can see just a little further up, there's the link and how to register for that.
I'm planning to come to that, Tom, and I think if people enjoyed today's thinking, you'll find a lot of parallels. Just a fun coincidence is that Susie and I have worked together for years. I mentioned her prompting us to identify the traits of multisolving, and she's had a hand in flower too. So good stuff to look forward to.
Yeah. Okay, sign up. Okay, and feel free if Doug, you had some comments, and Dan, you also had something call out about a nice visual. Feel free to unmute and make your pitch.
Well, two things. One, I didn't know maybe how to get a hold of you if I wanted to put a community session with my own community together. I'm quite connected in my own community, visual or in person. I'd love to learn about that if possible. And that other thing I just threw in there, I find frameworks and stuff very interesting. Obviously, there's the SDGs that we've heard about. There's a beautiful kind of flow chart that ties to Project Drawdown, which are actual climate solutions scientifically, and just how it shows. So not the same, but again, something maybe for those in the room want to see connection. I thought that was cool. It's not mine at all. I just thought it was really nice.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Chad is a friend, and his organization Regen Intel is sponsoring a stop on my book tour. Just to say there's lots of parallels between regenerative thinking and multisolving, and it's fun to geek out and celebrate those.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's we have a tradition in this, if we finish after a great dialogue, everybody claps 3 times and gives their gratitude to the group because of everybody's participation. And you clap 3 times, and then you receive that gratitude from the group to yourself because you contributed. So we're going to do the closing. Everybody come off of mute and come off of put yourself on screen. So, ready? Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.